I would consider myself to be a fiction reader. I love stories, characters, emotional arcs. So really nonfiction, it's never been my thing, but I've been wanting to change that. Not because I think I should read it, but because I want to learn how to engage with it in a way that feels sustainable, meaningful, and even enjoyable. In this video, I'm bringing you with me through that journey. I'm showing you what I read, how I read it, some tips in between that I found from reading those nonfiction books, and hopefully I could find some of my personal reading taste in nonfiction and hopefully make it seem a little bit less intimidating for me. Let's get started. Hi friends, welcome back to the channel. Welcome back. Welcome. My name is Caroline. I am very glad to have you here today. If you've never seen me before, I am a full-time research student currently on campus, but also somebody who loves reading and content creation. And so my entire personality trait is trying to fit reading and content creation into my very hectic, busy schedule. So if that's something that sounds right up your alley, I do reading tips, reading vlogs, some book recommendations, and also just like going through this journey together because I also just got back into reading 5 months ago. This week I gave myself a challenge, which is to read nonfiction more. I've never been a nonfiction girly. In fact, I read 2 nonfiction since I started getting back into reading, and I DNF'd both of them. I know. So I've been wanting to read more nonfiction and read some of the top nonfiction books from the New York Times bestseller list that I found. But that being said, let's talk about my TBR. So here's what I will be attempting to read and finish from the top nonfiction books from the New York Times bestseller. So first we have The Body Keeps a Score. This book I've been hearing a lot of good things about on TikTok, and so I'm interested to see what it's about. Next, we're reading On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder. I don't really know what this book is about. We also want to finish The British Are Coming by Rick Atkinson. This is one of the historical books that I mentioned about, so hopefully it's going to be very interesting. I heard very great things about this book, in that even though people say that it's a history books or political kind of heavy book, it's written in a way that's very narrative and storytelling, so that's a very interesting premise. Another very fun book that I found on that list is Cultish by Montell. This cover just screamed fun. I'm really excited to read this book. Hopefully it's gonna treat me very well. And finally, we're reading The Wager by David Chariandy. I have no idea what this book is about, except it's about a shipwreck. So yeah, no idea. But all of these books that I mentioned, they felt very, very heavy. They can have emotional depth, or they can have their own social critique. They can be talking a lot about history, using very dense language. But because of that, they are a perfect mix for me to just dive myself into and challenge myself to read more nonfiction. And I think this is going to be a very fun and challenging challenge for me to see where my reading capabilities really lie. Okay, I have a reading update in terms of The Body Keeps a Score. Disclaimer, I do feel like you should check the trigger warnings before reading this book. This is surprisingly a very hard book to read emotionally for me. This book is about trauma and how people deal with trauma, but also it dives deeper into the science and biology and the underneath biochemical, physiological processes that result in differences between non-traumatized and traumatized people's bodies. I found that to be quite frankly disturbing. I did have some pretty serious panic attacks and anxiety when I was reading certain parts about this book, especially when it talks about, sexual abuse. I felt a physical response and reaction in my body, but I got to the 200-page mark, so I would say I'm at the halfway point. This is one of those books that would live with me for a very long time. I did write down some notes when I was reading this book. I was very much interested in the part where he mentioned specifically how the brains between non-traumatized and traumatized people differ from one another, in that certain parts of the brain that are supposed to be activated are not activated in traumatized people compared to non-traumatized people. And he also dives a lot in terms of parenting and how the 2 years or the first couple of years in a child or an infant's lives is very much important, and it basically lays the foundation and groundwork for the many years to come. Specifically, he mentioned that how there's this process called attunement where infants and children, they learn to mimic their parents and their caregivers' activities, behavior, behaviors, facial expressions, and how that attunement and that kind of synchronization between the infant and the caregiver is very crucial. If there's little to no synchronization or attunement going on, the children were very much likely to develop either an anxious attachment or an avoidant attachment style, which I thought was very interesting. So I really recommend reading this book, but please check the trigger warnings and take it slow. The first tip that helped me was writing things down, and I feel very inclined to write things down when I was reading this book, jotting down my thoughts, the quotes, the statistics, kind of making connections where I feel like it is connected, and maybe painting a bigger picture and themes of where this is going, you know what I mean? And not only write the statistic, the quotes down, but also document what you're feeling and how you're feeling reading those stories and those experiences of people. The second thing was taking breaks. I'm gonna catch you when I finish reading the book. I finished The Body Keep the Score, and let's talk about this book. I gave this book a 4-star. I think it was a very important book that I feel like everybody should read, regardless if you suffer from trauma or not. The author does a very good job at balancing between scientific evidence, but also giving their own personal experiences, their patient experiences, and giving out very visual and explicit examples. After reading this book, I realized a lot about myself and how my trauma have been kind of neglected and overlooked. It's time that we really tackle the roots of the problem, and reading this brings me a lot of knowledge and insight about my body, the way that I deal with trauma, and the role of therapy, to be honest, because before I was just looking at therapy as this kind of the means to an end. But now that I think about it, and after reading this book, I feel like therapy and talk therapy specifically usually is not the means to an end. Usually talking about trauma doesn't solve the trauma itself. It just helps you become used to talking about it, and then maybe through that you could resolve that, but most of the time it doesn't resolve your traumas. I think the 2 tips that I mentioned of taking this slow, writing things down still apply. Yesterday I went to the library, and the plan was to either pick out The British Are Coming or On Tyranny, which are the next 2 books that I want to read. But then I was thinking I'm not in the mood for another history book or just like another political very heavy book. So I was thinking of not picking out the books following my TBR anymore, or things change, we can switch up the TBR. And as I was like looking around the library, I saw 2 books. I think these 2 sounds a lot more interesting to me, which is another thing, you know, pick something that you want to read, not that something that you think you should read. The first one that I came across was We Are Never Meeting in Real Life. This is a collection of essays by Samantha Irby. First of all, there's a cat on the cover, and that's why I'm like, I need to read this book. And then I came across A Letter to My Daughter, I've Been Meaning to Tell You by David Chariandy. It is a very short book. So those are the next 2 books that I will be reading, and I will update you as I go, and then hopefully after this we can attempt to come back to the original TBR. That's the update, and I'll see you at the halfway update. Okay guys, I am almost halfway through We Are Never Meeting in Real Life, and I've decided to DNF this book. This is one of those books that take a lot of brain power to relate to. This book targets a very specific audience, and that audience is not me. I really like her writing style though, like the stream of consciousness, the different tangents that she goes on is very reminiscent of me and what I do and what I think and how I think. But then her experiences as a Black woman in the United States, and you know, all of the pop culture references that she has, they are not relevant to me. I tried. This is like the 5th or the 4th essay or stories that I'm on, and I tried very hard to understand different references, different scenarios that she's trying to paint, but I just could not for the life of me understand what's going on. Her version of blackness was very interesting as well, but then I essentially decided to DNF this. I do recommend picking it up though. She likes watching reality TV show, and so most of the references were about, like, for example, Survivors or The Real Housewife of blank, and I didn't watch those shows, or I don't, so I had a very hard time understanding all of those references. Unfortunately, not for me. That being said, I will continue reading the next nonfiction book that I have. This is a memoir slash also essays, but more of a letter. This is A Letter to My Daughters. I've been meaning to tell you by David Chariandy, and I think this is gonna be a little bit more sentimental, and I would be able to connect more with the story and the characters. So I will read this book. I don't think I'm gonna be doing a halfway check-in just because it's very tiny and slim. So I'm gonna check back with you when I finish this book. I finished reading A Letter to My Daughter, I've Been Meaning to Tell You by David Chariandy, and this is absolutely heartbreaking but heartwarming and beautiful. Also, I apologize for the background noise. I am doing my laundry, so we do have to bear with that. This is not only David Chariandy's letter to his daughter, but this also is a story about ancestry, experience of being a person of color in Canada or being surrounded by a community that's predominantly white. Essentially about him telling his daughter about the politics of race. It was just like so beautiful. I almost cried at multiple points in the story. There's this incident that I just had to read to you. We live in a time, dearest daughter, when the callous and ignorant in wealthy nations have made it their business to loudly proclaim who are the deserving us, those really us, and who are the alien and undeserving them. But the story of our origins offers us a different insight. The people we imagine most apart from us are oftentimes our own forgotten kin. That's just so beautiful how people can actually connect to other people beyond the color of their skin or beyond their complexion. It's just like, read this, please. I'm halfway through The Language of Fanatism, Cultish by Montell, and I thought I would give you a halfway reading update. So far, it is very interesting. I do have to say that the beginning is a little bit more interesting to me compared to the middle part. I don't know why. I truly feel like the way that she describes how language is used in these cults and in these movements is very interesting. I mean, we know that language is very important in our day-to-day life, but I think language is particularly important in the religion aspect, but also the culture aspect where it can basically create reality. And I think diving deeper into that is very interesting. And also the way that she includes like personal experiences and stories and recollections is very useful and effective in helping me or driving the message home to me. I really enjoyed the part where she kind of explained the two major cults that mainstream media knows of, which is Heaven's Gate and Jonestown. She's talking about Scientology, which is one of the other more cultish organizations, and how they basically borrowed inspiration from 1984 and created their own dictionary and the entire language basically, and how that helps to tighten the bond between the members and help the followers to feel more connected and indebted even to the leader, which I thought was very interesting. I'm interested to see where this is going. I know she's gonna dive deeper into cult around aloe yoga, Lululemon, more pop culture, more contemporary cults, if that makes sense, or things that we look and we don't think of them to be cults, but I think they are, if that makes sense. So that's The Language of Fanatism, Cultish. I'm gonna update you when I get to the end of the book. After finishing this book, this will be the last book that I read for this video. I actually picked out another book from the library. I think it's like, so you want to talk about race, but I'm not in the mood for nonfiction right now, so I think I'm gonna take a break for a couple of days from nonfiction. I will finish this book, I think today or tomorrow, so that's the update. I am officially done with Cultish, The Language of Fanatism by Montell, and here's my official review and recap of this book. Like I mentioned from my halfway update, this is a book about how language can play such a central part in forming cults or just like forming organization in a community. Although it is a good thing that we could bond with one another using language, if language is used in a more extreme way, then that could really be detrimental to not only the person, but also society as a whole. I appreciate how she makes this book to be rather contemporary in that she dives deeper into how nuanced the definition of cults can be. We often think of cults as being something that's rather negative and that has detrimental effect and rather suicidal effect to the person and to the community that the cults belong to. But I think she also refers and gives examples of cults that we don't usually think of. For example, Lululemon or SoulCycle, the fitness industry as cults and movements in communities, and how they use religious-laden language like detox, purification. I've never thought of the fitness industry that way, but then when she mentioned how most of the words that we use to refer to this cycle of exercising is like detox, purify, slim down, all of those carry religious and predominantly Christian and Protestant ideologies, which I thought was very interesting. She also mentioned about the fashion industry, how Lululemon is a cult within itself, or Alo Yoga, and then different beauty and skincare brands. They tend to lean into this cultish definition and this cultish properties of a community to build their followers, to build a brand, and that makes sense on a business perspective. She also mentioned about social media as being a cult, and certain, especially within this day and age where, how we see mental awareness and consciousness and all of these spiritual terminologies on social media like vibration, divine alignment. All of those makes me think a lot about certain self-help gurus and people who preach mental health but more in a spiritual sense. She mentioned a example of Dr. Joe Dispenza, which I did not expect she to be mentioning him because he is a huge figure in the mental health self-help industry. His entire brand and personality and persona online is about neuroscience and neurology, quantum physics, and how you could use that to leap basically into a higher vibration. But then turns out with a bit of a digging on the internet, she mentioned in the book that he doesn't actually have a PhD. He's no doctor. Let me read you a passage from that part that I mentioned. Branding himself as the ultimate scientific spiritual authority, Dispenza's Instagram bio reads, researcher of epigenetics, quantum physics, and neuroscience, and he proudly flaunts his study in biochemical science at Rutgers University, as well as his postgraduate training and continuing education, whatever that means, in neurology, neuroscience, brain function, and chemistry, cellular biology, memory formation, and aging and longevity. Examining, for instance, his definition of the quantum field, an invisible field of energy and information, or you could say a field of intelligence or consciousness that exists beyond space and time. Nothing physical or material exists there. It is beyond anything you can perceive with your senses. And responding to that definition, a licensed psychotherapist and frequent exposer of digital wellness scammer on her Instagram account at the Wellness Therapist comments, quote, he's mainly speaking to people who may have little to no academic understanding of the field, but the words are a literal, inaccurate description of the quantum field. To say that nothing physical or material exists there is not only categorically false, but shows that this person does not have a present-day understanding of what is called the vacuum state or the quantum vacuum. Indeed, a quick probe reveals that Dispenza never graduated from Rutgers and has no PhD. His only diplomas includes a general BS, Bachelor in Science, from Evergreen State College and a degree from chiropractic school in Georgia called Life University. And yet Google Dispenza's credentials and his exceptionally well-optimized web presence will provide the top result. Dr. Joe Dispenza is a well-known neuroscience. As a white man in his 50s, just the kind of guy our culture wants a neuroscientist to look and sound like, he's largely trusted without question. End quote. Diving deeper into this dilemma of self-help gurus and mental health gurus who basically brand themselves to be these higher beings, these superhumans with exclusive knowledge about all these mental stuff going on for you to sign up for their courses and other things that they sell. So that's also very interesting. So I would highly recommend this book. So I would say I'm gonna give this a 3 stars because the middle part is actually very, very hard to read because she mentioned how the language, like I mentioned, is largely inspired by religious, Christian, Protestantinians, ideologies, terminologies, way of talking and speaking, which that part I found to be very hard to comprehend. So that's Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism by Amanda Montell. That being said, that is the last book and the end of the video where I'm going to be challenging myself to read nonfiction for a couple of weeks. Some tips, recaps. I do have to say that it is very hard, and I don't think I will be reading nonfiction for the next couple of weeks because that is a lot of nonfiction. I enjoy memoirs and just life experience-based, sentimental, personal stories more than collection of essays, for example, or even books like these that give you a lot of information. Although they are very useful, they can be very hard to wrap your head around. They require a lot of brain power. That means that I cannot be reading this book or these types of books just anywhere, anytime. I need to be sitting down, I need to be conscious, I need to be concentrated and really make sure I understand everything that I'm reading, which is very, very different from reading fantasy, because even when reading fantasy, I sometimes zone out and I blank out, I can still at the end of the day grasp what is going on and the basic understanding. But with these types of books, you cannot really do that. You have to understand it through and through. So if you're thinking of diving deeper into nonfiction as a genre, I think picking out the books that appeal to you and the topics that appeal to you might be a little bit better. I don't think having a rigid and a set TBR is going to be helpful. Just going in blind and go to the library, go to the bookstore, browse around, and then pick out the books that you seem interested in or you think might be interesting to read about. I think that's what I did, and that really, really worked for me and my personal taste and my reading style. Hopefully you enjoyed this video and hopefully you found all of these helpful. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And if you read any nonfiction recently, let me know down in the comment section. And also I would love to read more from nonfiction because I know that this is a fantastic genre. So if you have any recommendations in terms of nonfiction, let me know down in the comment section. Your recs, your book recommendation, book reviews, the books that you read, the books that you are planning to read. But thank you for listening. Thank you for watching once again. If you like this video, if you like my content, like my channel, please give me a subscribe, a like, share, comment. You know the drill. If you like to support my channel, I have a Ko-fi linked in the description. You can buy me a matcha, buy me a book, buy me a drink, whatever you want to buy me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting, and thank you for being here. I hope you have an amazing week, an amazing day wherever you are in the world. Please take care of yourself. Please rest if you need to, and please try to make time to read as much as possible, even with your busy schedule. That's all from me. I'm gonna be seeing you very soon with an episode, and until then, happy reading. Bye bye.